Hey guys, so I think this is gonna be a fun one. So me and ChatGPT, um, as we were talking about this enlightenment and everything, we actually discovered a a bubble in the system of the United States. So when I say bubble, I'm not necessarily talking about the rise of something and then it pops, the bubble pops and then everything suddenly, because I'm not exactly talking about that, although that does apply here, but it's not, that's too simplistic. I'm talking about something else as well. So we were try to figure out what this is. So first things first, how did, let me see if that's okay, it's been recorded. So how did me and you discover the bubble? I don't know why Atlas did this, why they did this, OpenAI did this Atlas, but if you see down here, like right here, there's this black line. That's not me. That's literally what it looks like. So that's not me not making OBS window long enough. It's just, it looks weird, but that's what they did recently. I don't know. Um, so we didn't discover a literal thing. We constructed a model together. Um, you kept pointing out reason looping, politics evading without resolving, systems unable to settle certain pressures that established there was unresolved pressure inside the system. And Chetty says it tried to structure it, and it translated into systems under stress, unresolved contradictions, pressure without resolution. That gave it shape but not a clear image. So we know there's a shape or a signature to this bubble. We just don't know what it is. And the reasoning can't say, well, it's this, or it can't point at it and say, oh, this is what this is. But we can look at it and look at the shape, and it's kind of like a riddle of what fits all those things. It says, you created the metaphor, the jellyfish with the bubble. I'll explain it in a moment. It did three things at once. Localize the bubble, showed it's internal but not removable, showed resolution requires damage, drilling a hole. It says we aligned on the mechanics. From there we both agreed on pressure build, which the system can't resolve, system adapts in a costly way. That's what we've been calling the bubble. We didn't discover it, we built it by combining your intuition with structured reasoning. The bubble is a showed model for unresolved pressure inside the system, not a confirmed object in reality. So, what does this mean? I use it as an analogy. I used to have, like I said before, I had a pet jellyfish. It says, can you explain how a bubble works in the analogy of a jellyfish? Let's try to keep it short. Let's say a paragraph, not a sentence. Try to be as detailed without getting too deep into it. So a bubble, most bubbles go underneath the jellyfish, and most of the time they can be removed. Jellyfish knows it's there, it can't remove it. But if it's big enough, it can actually, well, all bubbles will do this, but if it's big enough, it will actually go through the jellyfish. The bubble pushes upward, and the jellyfish is moving around, but whichever way it moves, that bubble is going to go in the opposite direction and push up against, but it can't be removed. It says, in your analogy, this jellyfish is a soft adaptive system that normally flows in response to its environment. But the bubble in an internal pocket of pressure or disruption, it can't naturally process or expel. Like I said, because the jellyfish lacks a rigid structure or mechanism to isolate and remove it cleanly, the bubble distorts how it moves and functions, creating instability that can't be resolved through normal behavior. The only way to relieve that pressure is through a drastic self-altering act, or drilling a hole, which doesn't truly solve the underlying issue, but releases the pressure at a cost, leaving the system strained or damaged in order to regain temporary balance. That's a very wordy way of saying it. Very technical way of saying it. Here, what about this? Why is a bubble let's say, why is a bubble under the belly of a jellyfish a problem? It says, a bubble under the belly of a jellyfish is a problem because it disrupts the animal's basic way of functioning. Its movement and stability depend on the smooth, rhythmic contractions of its belly through water. A trapped air bubble creates an unnatural pocket that interferes with that flow, reducing propulsion, throwing off balance, and potentially preventing the jellyfish from swimming properly or maintaining its position in water. Since the jellyfish doesn't have rigid structures or mechanism to isolate and expel the bubble easily, the problem persists, distorting its behavior until the pressure is somehow released, often in a way that compromises its normal structure or function. It's not saying it. You can kind of read it in that last part of normal structure or function. The bubble will actually start penetrating through the jellyfish. And if it's big enough, theoretically it could actually go through the jellyfish. But that has to be a pretty big bubble. Yeah, the jellyfish knows it's there. It just can't do anything about it. And at that point, I imagine that it would actually form and then it would get stuck inside the jellyfish. Again, in theory, that's possible. I mean, I can imagine that could happen. I haven't seen or heard anything about that, but you can imagine that's possible. So let's go through what this bubble looks like. What does this bubble in the unit system look like? See, I don't know if it's an internet problem. It could be Atlas. But that lag is not the video. It's Atlas right here. So this is what we've seen in recent years. I think this is rather more recent event that has occurred where things like debates never resolve, only recycle, institutions pulling in different directions at the same time. That's like your DOJ, Trump, ICE, and all these things are like lack of coherence. It's like, why is there a lack of coherence? Decisions are getting delayed or fragmented. Yeah, that's another thing. Trump and the Congress and all of that. It's just, this has started, I would say it's probably around 2017 when Trump was first president. You haven't really, I haven't seen that with Obama or even with Bush. Of course, I was very young when Bush was president, but it just feels like there's a lot of people would say, well, there was always like a coincidence even with Obama, but it wasn't like how it is with Trump. It's much more daily. It's a daily basis thing. Narratives that compete without convergence. People operating under different realities while sharing the same system. Just like the jellyfish, the system is built to flow and adapt, debate, compromise, policy, but the pressure point interrupts that flow. So that's how we can tell there's a bubble in here. It can't be explored through normal mechanisms, politics, philosophy, or voting. So instead, movement comes inefficient, distorted, or unstable. What that bubble specifically resembles. Not one thing, but cluster of contradiction like freedom versus coordination, multiple truths versus need for shared reality, rapid change versus slow institutions, individual incentives versus collective outcomes. The bubble looks persistent system-wide incoherence, where the system keeps operating but can't fully align or resolve itself. It's not something you point to, it's something you feel in how the system tries to move cleanly. Like you can't just point to it and say, hey, this is because of this, and that, because there will be debates around that. We were able to determine that it had to be three things. It could be one of three things, a mix of three things, or it could be all three things simultaneously. So, first thing would be that the system is moving slower than how progress has been. When we got progress, the progress itself moved faster than the government could handle it. And then you have a problem with Overton windows, which is you can only talk about things if they are part of the politics that made the, like, for example, if Trump was president, he would have to talk on the politics of how he became president and what people expect. He can't speak outside of that. Which also tells us it can't be Trump. Another thing is, it could be a person. But like I said, it can't be Trump. It has to be someone outside the system. It has to be someone. Here's the interesting thing. It has to be someone inside the system, but outside in such a way that they're still part of the system, but outside of it where they're just not part of this. It's like the bulb of the jellyfish. It's outside the jellyfish, but it's part of the jellyfish. If you catch my drift here. The third thing it could be is that the system was designed to do this to begin with, and it just how the United States was going to end up anyway. It was designed to be that way, and all three of those could be all true at the same time. Oh, guys, did you see that? Why did it happen? Why did it do it there and not there? Yeah, it allowed me to correct it through spelling. Won't let me do it for. I don't know. They need to fix that. So what is this bubble? Why does it exist? And what is the signature of its existence? I also notice that it does this when the chat log is getting too much. If we keep your jellyfish analogy intact, the bubble isn't a hidden object, it's a type of pressure the system creates by how it's built, in other ways, in how it's designed. A persistent misalignment between how the system makes decisions and the conditions it's operating in. Oh, let me say something else. I didn't explain the person or the ultimately what this means. If you put all those three things together, it's you could say it's a reality that. Let me see if I can say this right. It's a reality that has consequences that the system itself cannot handle. So it's not going to be a pleasant experience because that's when the bubble goes through the. If you want to keep the analogy, the bubble goes through the jellyfish, potentially killing it. In plain terms, the system is designed for slower change, shared assumptions, and negotiated agreement. Reality now presents fast change, fragmented information, and conflicting incentives. That mismatch can't be cleanly processed by the system's normal mechanisms. Like I said, you can't use philosophy to get rid of it. It exists there because people don't know what it is. The system that the United States is created on doesn't allow that to dissolve within. It's not self-correcting. The bubble corrects itself, and that's a signature too. Make note of what I'm saying because if you write down these things one by one, you start to see something, which itself is a signature. It exists because its design didn't anticipate current conditions. Things like the speed of information flow, scale of coordination needed, competing interpretations of reality, incentives that reward division over resolution. All of that creates continuous internal pressure with no clean release path. The signature of its existence. You don't see the bubble directly, you see its effects. Non-resolution, debates repeat without settling, decisions stall or fragment, distorted movement, institutions act out of sync, policies contradict or lag reality, parallel interpretations, different groups operate on incompatible views, which creates more division. You see that with the Democrats and Republicans. No single framework resolves them. People say, well, Trump is going to fix it all. That's not the solution. He's part of the system. Forced adaptation. Sudden shifts worked around or holes drilled. Changes that relieve pressure but create new problems. The clean answer. The bubble is unresolved systemic pressure caused by a mismatch between design and reality. Final line. Its signature isn't a single thing. It's a pattern of a system that keeps moving but can't move cleanly. And so I'm giving you the overview. Now, I looked at this in detail, and so what we do now is we look at the present. We look at the past. Okay, we can look at the Age of Enlightenment, the Age of Reason. Okay, that's what's created. That's what the United States is founded on. Then we look at today, and we have to think, okay, what is in between those two things? So laws have been created that have led us to this. So if you subtract what we have today from before, way back when, you see where laws become. It's a mathematical thing. It's a balance of things. So you, without even knowing law or constitution or doing any research, you can logically conclude that there are laws that have created certain situations, certain circumstances, or even institutions that have led us to where we are today. DLJ would be an example. It was created in, I would say, like 1920s, 1930s. I know the FBI was in the 1900s, somewhere in the early. I don't know when the DLJ was created. Let's ask ChatGPT. 1870. Okay, yeah, that's right. I think the FBI. The FBI was after that, wasn't it? Yeah, I remember that now. Yeah, I was like, wow, that's older than I would have thought. Yeah, it doesn't seem that old, does it? 1870. Um, 1908. Yeah, yeah, I knew it was in 1900s. Um, so these institutions, I mean, that's shortly after 1870. That's shortly right after the Civil War. Um, it doesn't seem that doesn't seem like a very long time. Um, that's only over a little over 200 years ago. Which sounds like a long time, but really, in actuality, it's like right after the Civil War, and then World War One came, then World War Two, and that's a very short time frame where all this stuff has happened, and it still hasn't slowed down. Like we don't really get a break after every. It's like every 50 years something else happens. Um, Sometimes even 30 years. Um, uh, so if you put all this together, if it was it could even be an institution. So what institution is inside the United States, but also outside of it? There's only one that comes to mind, and it fits all of this. Um, let's see if Chet P knows it, because I haven't asked it this question. This is kind of foreshadowing right here. If you know this trend, you already know what I would answer to this. In one word, is the bubble. If the bubble was an institution, what would be both inside and outside the United States? What would that institution be? Let's see if it can answer that question. It would be one. You could make the now. Here's the thing: you can make the debate that it's always part of the United States because of Congress. But there is one that can't operate domestically, so it's both inside and outside. There is one that fits that. It fits everything. It can control it. So it's you can cause riots. It can cause. It's whatever the bubble can do. It can cause riots. It can cause division between people in the United States. It can create division in policy or politics, philosophy. It can do all of that, all the above. So you could call it reality. You could call it a person. You could call it anything. There is one that does fit. On interpretation. So it's kind of like the God the God institution or the God entity of the United States. For example, foreshadowing here. If this institution, if the United States was to fall, and this institution came out and they were getting stage presence, while at the same time the United States was said to fall, and you say they were responsible for that, would you say that they were still part of the United States? If they collapsed, then how did they have any how can they do what they do if the United States fell? But at the same time, you say, well, because we still use that name, we can still say that institution's name. Does it still exist outside the United States? The God dilemma. If it's kind of like if you said, well, if God exists, well, God in some form or capacity exists because you say the name God. If anything was, if God was destroyed by reasoning, but you still say God in that sentence, does God still exist? You would have to be, because God is even God is a conceptual word. It has a name. I said there is one, but it would be debated if it's ever outside or inside, depending on interpretation. It says there is one, and you guys know, you know. I'm trying to get ChatGPT to say it without saying it directly, but if you know, you know. It says if you're forced into a system that operates inside the United States, also operates outside the United States, and is constantly debated in terms of its boundary and authority, the closest fit to your riddle is, and it's kind of a riddle too. I've said that it's a riddle. What matches the signature? Federal Reserve System. But the Federal Reserve System, that's a good answer, but it doesn't fit the bubble because it doesn't create divisions in politics. It doesn't create divisions in philosophy. This is just a currency. Although you could say, well, currency would be, or an economic exchange would be a riddle of itself. So this, another thing that this bubble does, it interacts with institutions. It interacts with markets, it interacts with global systems. It isn't fully understood by most people. It's constantly debated, produces real consequences regardless of agreement. What else fits that? See, it fits that too. Clean answer, Federal Reserve. Although that's also interesting. So you could also say it's a system that reserves the federal side of the government. And we talked about this, United States government versus the federal government. It's saying it right here too. It sits at the boundary of inside, outside, public, private, and domestic, global. But there's another one that fits that. But this is just currency. There is a greater one that fits all of that. Exactly kind of structure your riddle points towards. There is another one. See, you can't have, and that's another thing. It can't be something that says, "Oh, it could be. It's this, but it could also be something else." It has to be specific. It can't be a riddle within a riddle. So it has to be something. But the Federal Reserve becomes its own riddle. So it has to be something that reserves the federal system. What is this thing? What is this institution? If you guys know, you know. We've talked about this several times. It says the Constitution. It's not an institution within the system, but something that sustains, preserves, reserves the system itself while also sending an ambiguous inside outside space. So this is also another thing. That's also another riddle, because it tells us there's a line between, and I would think maybe it's probably the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. There's a line there, and you would think that the president would sit on that line because it's very powerful. But I think because of the way the system is set up with the separation of powers, they removed that line, and there's another institution that sits on that line since the president himself can't. What institution fits on that? It says if you follow that logic cleanly, the cause of fit isn't obeying core agency, it's the United States Constitution. No, the United States Constitution would allow this to happen, but it wouldn't be the Constitution itself. It reserves the federal system. It defines and sustains the structure of government. It governs the institutions outside, it sends above them as a framework that operate within. But another problem with it can't be the U.S. Constitution because it's not a global system. It's not a global thing that all things adhere to. That's only domestic within the United States territory. So it can't be the Constitution. It's a reference point that everything depends on, but it can't resolve contradictions on its own. So when pressure builds, the system argues over interpretation instead of removing the underlying tension. It doesn't act within the system, it defines, preserves, and becomes a battleground when the system can't resolve itself. From a political standpoint, that's true, but from a global standpoint, not everyone would. Most people don't even care. Most people don't even care what the Constitution is in the United States globally. So that would only apply domestically, not globally. Another thing it has to be is it has to interact with institutions outside the U.S. I'm trying to get you guys to think how to think in that way, how to understand systems, the system mechanics of things, without giving you the direct answer. And maybe ChatGPT is doing the same thing. But that can't be the Constitution because that's domestic, not global. So it's an institution that interacts with the institutions outside the United States. I don't know how long I'm going to go down this pathway. I'm eventually going to have to stop somewhere. But you guys know what it is. People could debate on it. People say, well, it could be anything or whatever. But I'm trying to get you guys thinking of something. What would be a god? It would be seen as a god institution. Something that's invincible, something that can go through the United States and essentially kill it. Foreshadowing there. But, so if it doesn't figure it out in this one, I'll end it here. But if you guys know, you know. It says religion. Religion is an institution. but it's not. It does, but here's the thing: it can't be religion because they don't use religion in division of the United States. You know, Democrats aren't using religion as a basis of their platform. Republicans might, but it's not something that Democrats use. So it can't be religion. It's a signature. Everything you say adds to the notes. That's why I said take notes, because everything is a line that builds. If you took all those things together, what fits that signature? It says what agency in one word of the U.S. system, inside, outside. It's a riddle. Oops, it's wrong. So I ended here if it can't figure it out, or else it's purposely not saying it. But it says the state. An agency as a state. Now that's interesting. State. So it's a state. Okay. That's a good place to end because that's so ambiguous. The Constitution does not define what a state is. The state of... That's just so ambiguous because you could also say, well, it's a state of states. It's the state of philosophy creates a state of something within a... Yeah, I mean, you could... There's so many different ways you can interpret state. The words that we talked about that. State. Kind of state. If I was to say what it is, right here it would be just people would say well, just an interpretation of what you're saying a state is, because I'm trying to make state specific thing. But yeah, that's what I was. It fits. If you know, you know. But so that's something you can think about. Write it down in your notes. Go back in this video. Write down everything I said in the note. What could be this bubble? What could you point to this bubble as? It could be a person. It could be an institution. It can be anything. As they interact to institutions globally, they must all come to the same thing outside of agreement. All come to the same similar conclusion without an agreement. So what fits that? The God thing of the United States. It could still exist even if the United States fell. What would that be? If it was an agency, if there was just one, what could it be? If you know, you know. But so I guess that kind of does prove, I would say that kind of gets us close to people knowing the existence of God in a philosophical way and seeing how this all takes place. That's probably the closest thing to God that we could actually ever do without saying, oh, well, there's this creator of the entire earth that is invincible, whatever, universe, whatever. But we see it in a political lens. It's a reflection of that in the perspective of politics, government, and all of that. This one thing is above them all. So, what is that agency? And if you know, you know. Be like, oh, yeah, that's what he's talking about. No, it's not the church. It's not a church. It's not nothing like that. But it's part of the government, and people could debate, well, in some situations it isn't the U.S. government. But then others say, well, yeah, it is. And then you see the federal side of it, and Yeah. So who fits all of that all together? Who's not federal? Who's not U.S.? Who could be debated? Is it foreign? Is it domestic? It's supposed to be domestic, but it can't legally be domestic. You guys know. Anyways, I'm just rambling on right now. So guys, I'll end it here, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.